taken from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 1, verses 39 to 45. Mary visits Elizabeth. At the time, Mary got ready and hurried to a town in the hill country of Judea, where she entered Zachariah's home and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leapt in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. In a loud voice, she exclaimed, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear. But why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me? As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leapt for joy. Blessed is she who has believed that the Lord would fulfill his promises to her." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thanks, Pearl. I have to say I agree with Rachel's assessment about Pearl's beauty and elegance. She's always the most elegant person in the room. So I just wanted to say that this is actually one of my favourite passages ever. So I don't know whether kind of it's yours, but kind of within the Advent story, I just see it as so beautiful. And actually, there was just the reason it became one of my favourite passages is I just read it at one point. I think I was around sort of 17 or 18, and it just did something to my heart. And I really connected with the emotion within it, and just that beauty of that moment, that gust of revelation that Elizabeth has, and just that pouring out of praise to God. I just loved that. It was just such a beautiful moment. And so that's kind of the focus of today. I really want to talk to everyone about revelation, about Jesus being at the heart of our love for him. So as Rachel said, the theme for this week of Advent is love. And I think, personally, that the most important thing to know about kind of love for God is that love for God takes revelation. People probably know the greatest commandment. It says, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And it also says in 1 John 4, we love because he first loved us. So what that says to me is that our love is always in response to his love. And what better time to think about that at Advent than Advent, which is, it says in John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whosoever believe in him will not perish but have eternal life. Jesus coming to earth was an act of God's love for us. And so I think, it's time to think about this. I think we know this kind of in practice, and certainly I've learnt this, that actually in an experiential sort of way, we actually love Jesus more when we see new sides of him. I don't know whether you've noticed that about yourself. We all became saved at one point, but actually, hopefully our whole lives as Christians, is all about growing in our love for God. And every time I've grown in my love for God, it's because I've realized something about his nature. So a part of me part of my heart has almost kind of interacted with God, and it's just unlocked this new wave of love for God inside of me when something's just clicked. Jesus is the bridegroom. He longs for his bride. When I actually really got that inside of my heart, it changed me. And so that's one of the things that we need to realize about our love for God. It's all about revelation. And that's why I think it says in Ephesians 3, 18 to 19, it says, I pray that you have the power to grasp the height and the width and the depth of Christ's love. And that's because his love is something that we need to grasp. And when we do grasp it, that stirs up love inside of us for him. And so I see the greatest commandment both as a command, but I also see it as a goalpost. It's kind of like a finish line for me. I think, we're not there yet. I think we need the humility to say and know inside of our hearts, we don't love God enough. we actually don't, if we're honest with ourselves right now, we don't love God with all our hearts yet, with all our souls. There's lots of other things that occupy our hearts. He's not always first. But having that as our kind of finish line, God, help me to love you more, help me to honor you more. That's what it's all about. And I'd just like to kind of camp in that kind of for a little bit longer, because I think it's interesting, of course, what happened with Elizabeth and Mary was very unique. It's never going to happen forever in history. It's amazing that, Jesus was, within Mary at that point, and that's what Elizabeth was responding to. But actually, it's not too dissimilar from our lives every day. And the reason why is because Jesus sent us a gift. He sent us the Holy Spirit. So actually, supernaturally, in some ways, we kind of get to be in that same situation as Elizabeth, because we get to be in God's presence, even now. It says in the Bible, where can I flee from your presence? Where can I flee from your spirit? So I think the question for us is, if that's the case, why aren't we constantly having these experiences? Why aren't we constantly having those kind of moments where it's like, oh my goodness, I'm just so aware of God's presence and I'm just overwhelmed with that revelation? Why is that not something that happens more frequently for us? What gets in the way? I think kind of before I sort of delve more into it, I just wanted to sort of share, I think, a picture that I received a few days ago that kind of, that for me is at the crux of this. And I'd just like everyone just to try and hold this image in your mind. People here in the room will probably know the Advent story quite well. We all know that when they got to Bethlehem, they were looking for a room to kind of give birth to Jesus in, and they couldn't find a room. So they ended up, Mary ended up kind of laying Jesus in a manger. That kind of concept of not being able to find enough room for Jesus, I think that's still relevant for all of us a little bit. The image that kind of popped into my heart as I was kind of getting ready for this was actually, potentially bizarrely, the story of Jonah. So if people remember the story of Jonah, he was a prophet, he was called to follow God, but he didn't want to do the assignment he was given. He didn't want to go to Nineveh. So what did he do? He ran away. But when he was on the boat, he knew God was calling him, and because he was avoiding him, God let him know that he was not going to let him get away with it. And I think the storm was the evidence for that. And what we see in that moment was that the sailors just started throwing things out of the boat. They were just throwing anything to try and save the ship from capsizing. And for me, that was an image of the things that we get rid of from our lives that are convenient for us. So when we're trying to pursue God, we might say, okay, well, I'm going to give him an hour on a Sunday morning. So we throw things out of the boat that are convenient, some things that are easy. But eventually, Jonah actually knew, okay, right, this storm isn't going to stop. I'm actually going to have to go in. And for me, that's a picture of us going all in Jesus. And actually, Jesus talks about this. He says, greater love has no man than this, than those who give up his life for his friend. And it talks about picking up our cross and following him. And there's this whole theme of dying to ourselves in our love for Jesus. It says, if you love me, you obey my commandments. And that obedience is actually kind of another death to ourselves and to choosing ourselves. So just try and hold that image in your mind. There's all sorts of things that are cluttering up our hearts that kind of block us when we're kind of trying to pursue God. There are things that we potentially hold up higher than God in our esteem, in our minds. They're things that we put before God, and we need to throw those out of the boat. But actually, eventually, we just need to go all in. We just need to say, it's all about you, Jesus. I just want to lay everything down before you. I guess what I wanted to talk about is something that I've realised about Jesus, kind of especially going to my son's play. Some of us would have gone to kind of school plays. I think it gets lost in the Advent story that Jesus didn't just get invented for the purpose of the nativity story. I don't know whether we all realise this, but he wasn't actually created just before that moment. As Rachel mentioned earlier, he's eternal. He's always existed. And so, what we see in Advent, this was actually just the point that he came on the stage and that Jesus came into time. It talks about that in Colossians 1:16. And if you have your Bible with you, or if you have a Bible app on your phone, I'd really like us all to open up to John chapter 1, verse 1, if we can, and just to look at this. So John chapter 1, verse 1. So it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made." And then if you go down all the way to verse 14, it says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth." So there we have it. Essentially, in the beginning was Jesus. He was the Word. He was here before everything that existed, and he launched all of creation into being. With the other parts of the Trinity, he is the one that kind of launched all of creation into being. And then he came to earth. And for me, I just thought that, there's so much restraint in how much, in the way that Jesus came to earth. Because I think, if I made something amazing, I probably want to get the credit for it. When I came to earth, I probably kind of, and you think about Jesus, all of eternity, he's been sitting there, and before, and from the beginning of the world, he's been sitting there and watching. I kind of see him on his throne at the edge of his seat. It says that he lives to make intercession for us. He's just watching everything and praying for us. And then when he finally got here, I would have been, wanted to make a bit of an announcement. I would have wanted to say, here I am. This is amazing. I'm here. And I'd want to kind of potentially just kind of make myself known. But there was so much restraint in how Jesus came to earth. You might think, he had all power. He had all majesty. Wouldn't it have been more incredible and more flashy to have a little toddler that was kind of like walking around healing people and raising the dead? Wouldn't that have been better? How many of us have watched The Incredibles? Is that anything that, yes, there we go. Within The Incredibles, at the end of the story, we kind of see the baby that they thought didn't have any superpowers, but actually it turns out that he has loads of superpowers, so he can kind of go through walls. That was just someone in The Incredibles, but God has all power. How much more kind of glory would that have brought to God, we might think, if Jesus had come and kind of from the offset just been sort of working all sorts of miracles. But actually, what we kind of see is that it was right that he lived in a way that was unremarkable, because that brought more glory to God. And as he kind of grew up, there was just so much humility in how he did it. And it says that he grew in favor with God and with man. And in the prophecy about Jesus coming, in Isaiah 53, it says he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. So for me, that kind of sets the scene as kind of the hiddenness of Jesus, the humility of Jesus. He came in a way that was quite inconspicuous, and most people weren't even aware that he arrived on the earth. There were only a select few that were aware of his arrival. I just think about it and think, how many people on earth would actually have wanted to be aware that their maker had made an appearance? I think probably everyone. Everyone would have wanted to know. If you think about it today, every reporter would have wanted to break that story. And I think if they'd have known, they probably would have thronged. You can imagine just everyone trying to get to Bethlehem. Everyone would have said, this is the place I need to be. This is insane. The creator of the entire planet is here. God has made his appearance on earth. If you think about those scenes from the Wonka movies, did anyone see the new Wonka? Yes, and it's actually the same in all of the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory movies. But you kind of see, everyone flocking to the gates because everyone wanted to know who got the tickets. Everyone wanted to kind of see inside the factory, and that was because there was a bit of a glory on Wonka. The excellence of the chocolate and his designs, and how much more glory on the maker of everything. But actually, even after people weren't there for his birth, most people didn't actually discern the glory on him, just as he grew up. Basically, until those last 3 years of his life, for 10/11ths of his life, he was on earth for 33 years, most people weren't even aware that he was God. And I'd like to kind of look into that a little bit, because I think this is relevant to this conversation about Revelation. Only a couple of people actually kind of picked up on that he was God, before things were revealed, right at the end. So the Bible actually says, it talks about this. It says in Psalm 115, verse 5 to 8, it actually talks about the fact that what we worship, or what we hold highest in our hearts, and what we hold higher up than God, actually can dull us to the things of God. It can make us numb. So it's actually hard for us to discern God. It says in those verses, it says, they have eyes, but they cannot see. They have ears, but they cannot hear. And noses, but they cannot smell. And those who make idols are just like them, but so are all who trust in them. And all of us, I think as we kind of grow as Christians, we actually realize that there's little bits of idolatry in our heart. There are little things that we hold up higher than God within us. And those are things that hopefully God gives us the grace to pick up on those things and to kind of address those, because those are the things that numb us to God. So if you notice in the story in Luke chapter 2, you'll see kind of what it took to get a revelation of him, because actually Simeon and Anna jumped the queue on most people, and they're the ones that were able to kind of see Jesus in the temple, and they were kind of, we hear that Simeon was basically waiting before he died to encounter the Messiah. They're the ones that picked up on it. But everyone else, throughout his life, and even in those last 3 years of his ministry, people were always saying to him, are you the one? Are you the one we've been waiting for? He was healing people. He was raising the dead. In John 21:25, the Bible actually says more healings were done by Jesus than could ever, more miracles were done than could ever be written. And word was spreading all the time. As we heard, this is amazing. There's someone here that's just doing so many miracles. He seems to have all this power. So no one else that lived actually ever came close to Jesus, but still people that were there when he was on earth weren't still able to accurately perceive him. At one point, they actually tried to throw him off a cliff. They were so offended when he cast out demons from someone that had actually made life in their community really unpleasant. This is the man of the Gadarenes that we talked about in the last sermon series. Someone that actually made part of their local area really unsafe. But they got really offended when he cast out demons from that person. And kind of another example of this is in the crucifixion. One of the things I've been doing recently is just reading about the crucifixion more regularly. And the bit that kind of turns my stomach is just how willingly and repeatedly they cried, "Crucify him." So I don't know if anyone's kind of read this recently. I know we've been talking about this within the Advent series. It's you can't divorce, his coming to earth from his death, really. But it always turns my stomach reading it. They were just in a frenzy, is actually the word that it uses in one translation of Luke. They were basically frothing at the mouth, hating him so much because they were offended. And I just think, when I'm reading that, can you actually imagine a bigger fail? So this is like a trend. Hopefully not just the millennials in the room will know this trend. Has anyone heard of this phrase, epic fail? Has anyone? Yes? Yeah, okay. This is the thing that was like a big thing like 15 years ago. But that's what I always think about, because Jesus, he's actually, he's the most beautiful and he's the most powerful being in the whole universe. He turns the wilderness into a forest. He heals. He has the most incredible wisdom. The picture that we see of Jesus in Revelation, he fills all of heaven with light. He's so stunningly beautiful. He's just so wonderful. But actually, you have the opportunity to say anything around Jesus, and the only time you interact with him and all you can say is, get rid of him. That's all they could say near Jesus. And if we think about it, our whole lives with Jesus are defined by that longing, that seeking, that yearning, that anticipation for Jesus. And that was the case for the Jews. So they were waiting for the Messiah. They were yearning for his return. But it's possible that he was right in front of you and you miss him. It's possible that Jesus is right in front of you and you just don't see him. And I just think, how embarrassing, what an opportunity missed. Even the crowd at Golgotha, at the crucifixion, they were reviling him. I mean, I can just imagine being there, and I just think, wouldn't it have been the greatest honor of your life just to be there? Even just to be able to carry his cross as someone did, or just to witness in reverence the most significant act in human history, because that was the most significant thing that's ever happened in all of human history, was actually Jesus dying on the cross. Just to be there, I mean, that would be so incredible. But what happened was, they couldn't see it at all. They were so stirred up by all the political things going on, and they actually said, when Pilate said, he's innocent, are you sure? They said, yes, we're sure. Let his blood be on us, and let his blood be on us and our children. They were actually happy to be cursed. And for me, all of that I've just been speaking about, that kind of illustrates to us what the flesh does. Okay? That's one of the things that will sabotage you every single time. It's the flesh. It's the part of us that's not quite redeemed yet. It's the part of us that it calls it the carnal man inside of us. There's a part of us that's resistant to the things of God, and that kind of just doesn't recognize Jesus for who he is. And so it will sabotage you. Some of us might be able to relate to what I'm about to say, but you can be in worship and everyone else will be encountering God, everyone else might be hearing God's voice, everyone else might be being filled with strength or being healed around you, and you just might be thinking, I'm really annoyed with Rachel. I actually waved at her this morning and she completely blanked me. She could have been looking in another direction, but sometimes that was, Rachel says hi to everyone. But that will sometimes happen. So, or just like a slightly embarrassing example that I told Lauren and Joel the other day. One time I was in worship and I just could not stop thinking about the fact that I completely forgot to put on my deodorant, and it was just shocking. And I just couldn't think about it. I was like, I need to go back home. I hope no one can smell me. This is terrible. Sometimes you can actually, you can just completely miss it. And it was, that particular morning, God was doing amazing things. There was such an amazing presence of Jesus, but actually I was just so in my head. And that can happen to us. And so it's possible to miss our opportunity to worship him as King and as Lord because we don't discern him for who he is, or because we're just blind to him, or because our hearts are too occupied, or our hearts are just too dull, or just too numb to just recognize him for how glorious he is. Just to recognize, he's so worthy of worship. He's worthy of everything we can give. Our hearts will let us down every single time we let them lead us. And so for me, I just think about it and just, think about everything I've just been saying. Most people weren't aware of what was going on in Advent, but based on everything that happened for the next 33 years, and particularly what happened in those last 3 years, I don't actually think it would have mattered if they had known in some ways. I think people would have been excited if someone had put out a newspaper article and said, the maker of the universe is going to be on this street in Bethlehem at this time, go and see him. People would have gone then. But just to come across him, the majority of people wouldn't have recognized who he was or responded to him appropriately. And that's because you need to discern Jesus, and you need to pick up on his glory. And that's true of us every single day now. Even now, we need to discern him. We can go through life and we can just say, I'm too busy, I can't find the time to spend time with Jesus. But actually, this is how I like to say it, one whiff and you're overwhelmed. If you just pick up on Jesus in the room, or you just pick up on his presence, and you're just locked in. He captures your attention. All it takes is just one little bit of revelation, and it changes the game. We're suddenly able to engage with him. So we see that scene with the kings or the magi on their knees before the manger that Jesus lay in, and kind of all the way through the nativity. We've got so many different people that kind of show us how it's done. The shepherds are the same. It's basically, when you encounter Jesus, you drop everything and you bow, because he's just that beautiful. That's how to respond to him. But he's easy to miss. And I think that's the point I'd like us all to take away. Jesus is so beautiful. But there's so many different things that can come in and there's just baggage that we can hold in our hearts that can kind of clog up our hearts. And there's things that just make us numb to Jesus, so that when he's doing things, when his presence is there and is among us, sometimes we can miss him. So it's revelation that makes the difference between encountering him and missing him, or even despising him, as happened on the cross. And so if it's possible to be in the presence of Jesus, the most magnificent one, and miss him, we need to pray for eyes to see and ears to hear, and to get away from everything that dulls us. And so just as we finish, I hope that there's been something in what I've shared for you, but what I'd really like to recommend to people is something I've been doing, is just to study the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs. I don't know if people have read it in the room. It's amazing. My sister over there did an amazing study. She's studying theology, and she did this kind of little kind of life group where she was kind of going through the Song of Songs, and it's beautiful because it just walks you through the king, the bridegroom. Jesus is the bridegroom and his longing for the bride, and it just shows the bride, who's us at the church, and her love in response to the bridegroom. And it really, like, as you read it, if you read it kind of and you really get it, it just stirs up so much love in you for him. So I'm just going to read one verse from Song of Songs as I finish. And this is from the Passion Translation. It says, "Draw me into your heart. We will run away into the king's cloud-filled chamber. We will remember your love, rejoicing and delighting in you, celebrating your every kiss as better than wine. No wonder righteousness adores you." And I love that last bit of the verse, because it kind of talks about how the righteousness inside of us is the part of us that's able to adore Jesus. Thanks, everyone.